On this vote, the yeas are 52 and the nays are 47. 3/5 of the senators duly chosen and sworn not having voted in the affirmative. The motion is not agreed to.
Mr. President.
Recognize the Majority Leader.
I enter a motion to reconsider,
The motion is entered.
and I send a cloture motion to the desk for the motion to proceed to calendar number 311, H.R. 7147.
The clerk will report.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the motion to proceed to calendar number 311, H.R. 7147, making further consolidation appropriations for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2026, and for other purposes, signed by 17 senators as follows.
Mr. President, I ask consent the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from Alabama.
Mr. President, I rise today to pass this legislation by unanimous consent and offer a 2-week continuing resolution so that we can ensure that DHS is fully funded while we continue to negotiate. 2 weeks ago, we agreed to extend funding while we talked and tried to find a pathway forward. However, the timeline we knew was going to be short. It took the Democrats until Saturday evening to actually produce legislative text. Within the next 4 days, we were able to exchange dialogue and text again. You can take a look at what we've seen from the President and his outreach, what you've seen from the Secretary of Homeland Security and the deployment of body cameras across the country, and what we've heard from Thom today. We are working in good faith to find a pathway forward. What we're asking is, let us continue to do that. We're asking today for the exact same thing that we had 2 weeks ago, extend this funding for 2 more weeks so that as we talk, that as we negotiate, TSA agents don't miss a paycheck, so that FEMA workers who are helping to get out disaster relief to people who have been ravished across this country, in particular in the South, just in the last few weeks. We lost over 60 individuals to the deadly winter storms. There are people who need help. And the people who are working to provide that help for them, Mr. President, they deserve a paycheck. When we're looking at CBP and ICE continuing to do their work, look at what's happening across the country, it's important that we stand shoulder to shoulder with our law enforcement officers, allowing them to make sure that they keep themselves safe and the communities at large. There are very important jobs that they have, like HSI agents that go after child pornographers and drug traffickers, that make sure that Americans are safe, Mr. President. HSI has done tremendous work and must be continued to be funded. You look at Secret Service, the list goes on and on and on. Secret Service continues to protect not only Americans' leaders, but it makes sure that when we have events like the World Cup, Olympics, that Americans and those who are visiting here are safe and secure. It's clear we are operating in good faith. We are working to find a pathway forward. And the fact that people, these employees, people who have stepped up to serve their country are not gonna receive a paycheck, to me is just totally, completely unacceptable, Mr. President. Look, we don't have to go down another government shutdown pathway, and that's exactly what this is. By not allowing us time to continue these conversations and shutting the government down, real people will pay the price. These same workers, these same agents who went without a paycheck for 43 days because of the failure of the Democrats to come to the table then. It's exactly what we're seeing now, Mr. President. It's a choice. It's entirely up to Senate Democrats. We stand here today to say we are operating in good faith. We have continued to move the ball forward. Let's keep talking. Let's keep working. Let's do a 2-week extension. Don't let anyone miss a paycheck. Let's make sure that we keep Americans safe coast to coast. I hope they will make the right choice, but that's entirely up to them, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 156 H.R. 4553, and I further ask that the Britt substitute amendment at the desk be considered and agreed to, and that the bill as amended be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Recognize the senator from Connecticut.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object. I think our caucus was confused and frustrated by how long it took for our Republican colleagues to come to the table and start discussions. The minute that we passed a 2-week continuing resolution for the Department of Homeland Security, we knew we were going to have to enter into some hard discussions about how we can rein in ICE's lawlessness, which is what the American people demand. And yet, during the first week of that 2-week continuing resolution, there was no clarity over who we were supposed to be negotiating with. Was it Senate Republicans? Was it the White House? And in fact, it wasn't until last night, literally on the verge of the shutdown, that we got our first offer of text from the White House. Far too late to be able to engage in any compromise before the deadline. So I wish we weren't here. I wish our Republican colleagues in the White House had shown more seriousness from the start. But Senate Democrats have been clear that we have all taken an oath to uphold the law of the country. And this Department of Homeland Security, this ICE, is out of control. They are tear gassing our children's schools. They are killing American citizens. They are disappearing legal migrants. I went down to Texas a couple weeks ago and sat across a table from 2 elementary school students who had been detained illegally for 6 weeks over Christmas while their mother was at home. It was a choice ICE made to traumatize and terrorize these children. Those children were alive on the outside, but dead on the inside. So, yes, we believe we have a constitutional obligation to only fund a Department of Homeland Security that is obeying the law. And this Department of Homeland Security is not obeying the law. So I am hopeful that these discussions will continue. But frankly, we had plenty of time to get a deal in the last 2 weeks. And the lack of seriousness from the White House and from Republicans not getting language until last night has put us in the position we are in today. We want to fund the Department of Homeland Security, but only a department that is obeying the law. And for that reason, I would object.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Recognize the senator from Alabama.
Look, I'm going to say it one more time. We wanted more time. Democrats asked for 2 weeks. Our concern was that 2 weeks wasn't long enough. It took the Democrats a week to articulate what it is they wanted. They articulated it via press conference and via tweet, not by conversation. Let's be clear, not by conversation. Then it took them a number more days from Wednesday to Saturday to come up with legislative text. We then did the same thing, working back and forward. Look, you've seen advancements made from the administration. We saw a big announcement made today by Thom, and there is no way that you can't say we're working in good faith. We want to continue this conversation, but yet you're penalizing a TSA agent. A TSA agent is going to go without a paycheck. Why? So that you can posture politically. I'm over it. Everybody on that side of the aisle knows that ICE and CBP will continue to be funded. They're going to continue to enforce the law just as they should. Who's going to pay the price? Is the TSA agent. It's the person working at FEMA who already went 43 days without a paycheck, who's trying to figure out how to make things work. I have reports of TSA agents sleeping in their car because they can't afford gas, selling plasma to make their bills. Guys, come on. We're asking to continue a conversation. When the Biden-Harris failed border policies allowed for millions to come across our border unvetted, when there were American citizens who paid the price in that moment, Mr. President, like Jocelyn Nungary, who was 12 years old and raped and left under a bridge, like Laken Riley, who fought for her life for 17 minutes, Mr. President, before her skull was bashed in. And we kept saying, we've got to do more to secure our border. And our Democratic colleagues said that takes legislation. It can't be done. Well, we know that's not true because all we needed was a new president who secured our border and helps to make our country safe. Look, I believe we are a nation of immigrants. We're also a nation of laws. And the lawlessness has to stop. But even in the midst of all of that, fentanyl overdoses at an all-time high, Mr. President, we didn't shut the department down. Not one time. And today, Democrats are choosing to shut the department down. We have exchanged texts. That's what you do in a negotiation. You work to find a pathway forward. There was an announcement today that shows we are operating in good faith. I don't know why people who have nothing to do with this are going to have to pay the price for us continuing to work to find a pathway forward. Mr. President, it would be different if we had thrown up our hands and said, nah, we're not going to send you anything back. We want this to work. We believe in our laws, we believe in enforcing them, and we believe in the men and women who do that. And so this is an unfortunate day. It's a sad day. It's certainly not one that had to happen. I want to be very clear. All we're asking for is 2 weeks to continue this conversation, to figure out how to make this work, and to do what's right for all American citizens. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Recognize the senator from Connecticut.
Mr. President, I just want to reiterate that we got the language last night. We've been in a 2-week continuing resolution, and last night we got the first offer of legislation from the White House. We're not in charge. The Senate Democrats aren't in charge. We don't run the House. We don't run the White House. We waited for a week for there to be some process to be convened. We got no signal as to what that negotiation would look like, so we finally put our proposals, our text on the table, and didn't get an offer back until last night. My wish is for my Republican colleagues to be just as upset as they are about what is going to happen next week at TSA or at FEMA as for the children that are being traumatized right now in this country, who are being thrown in what's called the baby jail outside of San Antonio, the lives that are fundamentally changed by an immigration policy that is out of control, to have concern for the American citizens who have been killed simply exercising their First Amendment rights, to care about the 4 million Americans who are losing their insurance as we speak because this administration has chosen to put money into a lawless immigration enforcement operation instead of protecting people's health care. That's what's happening in America today. 4 million people are losing their health care insurance. 20 million people are having their rates go through the roof because the priority is flooding Minneapolis with ICE agents chasing down kids at school bus stops, as they were doing just 2 days ago in Minneapolis, instead of protecting people's health care. People are losing health care in this country so as to fund this runaway Department of Homeland Security. And so we all have outrage about what is happening in this country today. And I don't know why it took the White House until last night to send any semblance of specifics on what they were willing to work for. We have an obligation as members of Congress to fund a government that obeys the law. This Department of Homeland Security is not obeying the law. They are not. and I would argue that every member of this body, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, in order to uphold your oath of office, should not be funding an agency that isn't complying with the Constitution and the statutes of the United States. So I do regret that we are at a moment in which we are not going to be able to fund the Department of Homeland Security, but there's a simple solution. If the agency starts behaving lawfully, if they start obeying the Constitution, then we can get back on the same page. This is an exceptional moment in this country's history. And my hope is that these negotiations move fast, expeditiously, and that perhaps as soon as we return, or if the majority leader would like to call us back into session next week, we can get the department back up and operating. But that's only going to happen with reforms. That's only going to happen with more serious engagement from the White House than has happened thus far.
Mr. President.
Senator from Alabama.
I think that these children do matter. And I think the 500,000 unaccompanied kids that came across the border during the Biden-Harris administration matter too. Many of them with phone numbers, safety pinned to them, or written on their arm. The Biden-Harris administration got rid of the DNA policy to make sure that these kids were going to family members. These kids were lost. Many of them still are. What we heard Thom Homan say today, the day we're voting to say, can we continue this conversation? Can a TSA officer still get a paycheck while we talk? Is he said that there was a significant drawdown there in Minnesota. He said operations were successful and that 3,000 kids who had been lost had been found. Now, I remember coming down here and talking about that. I remember talking about these kids that had wandered across the border. But we deserve better. America deserves better. These kids deserve better. And this is really simple. Are we negotiating in good faith? If it takes you over 8 days to get us legislative text, and we're able to turn that around in a couple of days, you have an announcement like you have today, it's clear that we are. And so why you're making people pay the price like a TSA officer to go without pay again is beyond me, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Thank you. Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from South Carolina.
Thank you very much. So DHS apparently is going to shut down. I hope we can get it back open. What is this all about? Obey the law? Good, I got an idea for if you want people to obey the law in this country, do away with sanctuary cities. Senator Murphy is from Connecticut. It's one of 12 sanctuary states. What does that mean? Local officials, state officials refuse to work with the federal government to turn people over to the federal government as required by federal law. So you want to obey the law in Connecticut? Stop being a sanctuary state. You want to fix immigration? Have policies that make sense. Y'all act like for 4 years Biden wasn't president. Every Democratic senator aided and abetted the Biden administration with a massive invasion of this country. You turned the other way. You never said a word. You let Biden obliterate our border. You let him send people into the interior on planes, trains, and automobiles. Only God knows what happened, who's here. You said Biden, you did nothing. And here's what I've learned about my friends on the Democratic side. They're never going to agree to deport anybody because all their proposals make it pretty much impossible to deport anybody. Body cameras, that makes sense. If you want to find out how to make ICE more professional, count me in. But your proposal is to require a judicial warrant to deport somebody. Can you imagine how many judges you would need if you got 15 million illegal people here to go get a warrant from a judge? This is not a criminal proceeding. This is an administrative proceeding. The president, as the commander-in-chief, has the ability to detain and deport people administratively. You don't need a federal judge. You're trying to create a mechanism so we will fail cleaning up your mess. We got elected to clean up your mess. We're going to hold ICE agents accountable if they went too far. Thom went to Minnesota to turn the heat down. Great. Democratic politicians all over this country have been turning the heat up. You're wedded to lousy, dangerous policies. Senator Murphy, why don't you get Connecticut right with federal law? Here's what's happened. We got 12 sanctuary states, 200 plus sanctuary communities, 25,000 people. ICE has requested a detainer, ignored for 2 years. States have refused to work with ICE for 25,000 people that have a detainer at the federal level. Sanctuary city law is a magnet for future illegal immigration. Sanctuary city policies are full of fraud, like in Minneapolis. They bring out the worst in the system, not the best, and it breaks down law and order. We've been talking for weeks about you want to fix things. You're blocking a debate. I can't believe I'm here. I thought we were going to work together to try to find out how to reform ICE and also address the bottom line problem, which is sanctuary city law abuse. That's the problem, not ICE, not Miller, not me, not Nome. Policies that have been in place that entice more illegal immigration. Every Democratic senator turned the other way during the 4 years of Biden. You didn't do anything to bring reason to chaos. How many of you spoke about Lincoln Raleigh? Talking about children being abused. How many thousands of people have been raped and abused, stolen, and mistreated because of this invasion of illegal immigrants from virtually all over the world, with people from gangs, you name it. So you never talk about the victims. You just want to talk about TV in Minnesota. I'm all for these ICE agents being reviewed. I'm all for making them more professional. But I'm not all for stopping the mandate that President Trump was given, which is to deal with illegal immigration and the criminal elements therein. So I have legislation, it's S3805, and it says if a state or local official does not turn over to the federal government an illegal immigrant who's facing criminal charges, been convicted or facing criminal charges, then that state or local official can go to jail. You have an obligation under federal law to turn these people over. Sanctuary states and cities, 25,000 ICE detainers denied. 25,000 people that should be deported have not been turned over to the federal government because of these 12 states and these 200 sanctuary cities. Let's get to the root cause of the problem. So, Mr. President, I am going to ask unanimous consent that we vote on S3805 that would make it a crime for a state or local official not to turn over to federal authorities a criminal illegal immigrant. Somebody's charged with a crime or convicted with a crime, and if you don't turn them over, you would face punishment. That will stop illegal sanctuary city policy. If people knew they would go to jail for breaking federal law, I think they would stop. You've had weeks, and we're not even debating. You're never going to change. If you want to have immigration policed, our Democratic friends will never be there for you. They turned their back on you and your family and allowed this nation to be invaded by 10, 15, 20 million people. Who the hell knows? We're trying to fix it. We're trying to fix it, and we're not going to give up. And until you change the policies, you never stop illegal immigration. If there are 12 states, Mr. President, that have sanctuary status, they'll keep coming. All they got to do is get to one of these states. It's magnets for future illegal immigration. It breaks down law and order, and it needs to stop. So, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 318, S3805. Further, I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
Recognize the senator from California.
President, I understand that this is a very important subject for my passionate colleague from South Carolina, but also think there's a very fundamental misunderstanding, at a minimum, about what sanctuary policies are and what sanctuary policies are not. Now, as I was listening to my colleague, he's tried to paint a picture of sanctuary states or sanctuary cities as nothing but lawless. And I get that's maybe a favorite soundbite for right-wing media, but the fact of the matter is it's not true. Sanctuary policies do not mean that there are no laws or that the federal government can no longer enforce federal law in those jurisdictions. What sanctuary policies are is simply an affirmation that immigration enforcement is the job of the federal government, and that state and local authorities cannot be co-opted or forced into performing inherently federal responsibilities. It means that while federal agencies carry out immigration enforcement, state and local law enforcement will choose to focus their time, their energy, their resources on public safety in the local communities. So let me say that again, as clearly as I can. Sanctuary policies do not prevent ICE from going into any state or any city to arrest the violent criminals that the administration says they're after when they're being released from prison. And by the way, it's not like ICE does not know when someone is arrested. In fact, the federal government is notified every single time an individual is booked into a jail or prison. This means nothing is preventing ICE from picking up individuals when they are released from custody. But instead of prioritizing picking up the dangerous, violent criminals they talk so much about, what's ICE doing instead? They're out roving streets in communities across the country and arresting people based on the color of their skin or the language that they speak or their perceived occupation. There's now a term for this, by the way. These are now known as the Kavanaugh stops because of Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh, and by extension, that majority of the Supreme Court sanctioning this practice. It's wrong. Now, I know my colleagues disagree with sanctuary policies as they are, official, technical. He describes sanctuary policies as, quote, killing this country. I've heard that a few times. And that by enacting sanctuary policies, leaders in these states are somehow, quote, openly defying federal law. Again, wrong. You can have your own opinion, but you can't own the facts. Far from defying federal law, courts have actually upheld sanctuary laws and policies. I'll reference just one. In the 1997 ruling in Prince versus United States, Justice Scalia wrote, quote, the federal government may neither issue directives requiring the states to address particular problems, nor command the state's officers or those of their political subdivisions to administer or enforce a federal regulatory program. Such commands are fundamentally incompatible with our constitutional system of dual sovereignty. End quote. That sure doesn't sound like anyone is defying any federal law to me, and nobody's accusing Justice Scalia as having been a left-wing radical. And yes, we do have more recent examples of courts rejecting the Trump administration's attempts to strong-arm cities and states into acting as federal immigration agents. Let me just say this. These policies that my Republican colleagues are determined to attack are not the reason for the chaos that the American people have been watching in horror unfold in the cities of Los Angeles and Chicago and Minneapolis and so many others. Sanctuary policies aren't the reason why American cities and citizens are being pepper sprayed or tear gassed, beaten, unlawfully detained, or even fatally shot in broad daylight like Renee Good and Alex Preddy. What's endangering the American people's safety and security is an out-of-control administration that has empowered a mass paramilitary force of ICE and CBP agents to act with impunity, without accountability, without oversight, and without consequences. If we truly want to talk about public safety, then we need to be talking about reining in an out-of-control Department of Homeland Security, not scapegoating states and cities who choose to prioritize their local resources for their local public safety. So for the sake of the American people's safety and well-being, Mr. President, I object.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President, yes.
I recognize the senator
Thank you.
from
I'll
South
wrap
Carolina.
it up quick. Thank you, my good friend, Senator Padilla. Number one, we're going to have an election in November. Senator Padilla says that sanctuary policies are not part of the problem. I think they are. I think the American people believe that when 12 states refuse to cooperate with the federal government when it comes to enforcing federal law, they become sanctuary states and cities. It entices more illegal immigration. You know why we're not voting on my amendment? Because most people don't agree with him and they're afraid to vote. The only reason we're not voting on my amendment is because you'd have to go back and tell the country why you voted against stopping sanctuary city policy that is one of the biggest magnets of legal immigration, leads to massive fraud and a breakdown of law and order. The parties are in two different places. Democrats, through Senator Padilla, believe that sanctuary policies are no problem. The Republicans, including me and President Trump, believe we'll never have orderly immigration until you get to the root cause of the problem. You got 12 very liberal states, 200 cities that refuse to work with the federal government to turn over people subject to deportation. I have an amendment that's being blocked that would make it a crime for a state or federal official who has custody of a legal immigrant facing criminal charges or been convicted of criminal charges. It'd be a crime for them not to turn them over to the federal government to be handled and deported. They don't want that vote. You're never going to stop sanctuary cities until you make the people in charge of the state and the city pay a price for ignoring federal law. To the American people, you're not wrong to believe sanctuary city policy is bad for your country. Democrats are wrong to support it and want to continue it. So what do we hear on the floor today? Not only do they don't believe it's a problem, they wish to continue it. This is why I want to vote. We're going to have a vote on this. You want to continue these policies. You don't think they're a problem. I want to end them. Let's have a vote, a debate and a vote. You bring up any amendment you want to bring up about making ICE better. Defund it. Whatever you want to bring up, I will vote on. But you're denying me a vote today on the root cause of the problem because you have absolutely no interest in recognizing it to be the root cause of the problem. As a matter of fact, you said, I am wrong to believe that sanctuary policy is bad for our country. No, you're wrong. You're wrong to have turned your back on 15 million, 10 million, 20 million coming into our country for 4 years. You're wrong to sit by and watch these states obliterate the law. 25,000 people. Local government, state government refuses to turn over to ICE that are eligible to be turned over. 8 million people in these illegal sanctuary states and cities. This is a debate worthy of the United States Senate and of a great nation. Is Senator Padilla right? Sanctuary policies are not bad for the country. They should continue. Or am I right that we should reform ICE, but we also should end the biggest magnet to illegal immigration out there, I think, is 12 states who violate routinely federal law. 12 states who, if illegal believes you can get there, you're never going to leave the country. If we don't fix this problem, we never fix illegal immigration. And in the Gang of Eight bill, we actually fixed this problem. So what have I learned? I've learned that I can't get a vote on an amendment that would require state and local officials to obey the law or go to jail themselves when it comes to criminal illegal aliens. My amendment says if you've got a criminal in your custody and you don't turn the criminal over to the federal government as you're supposed to, you could go to jail. They should go to jail. We can't have that vote. We can't have that debate. This is a phenomenal day for the United States Senate. We've got the senator from California openly saying, we have no desire to change sanctuary policy. We think it's okay. And we got me and all of us on this side saying you need to end this. This will continue. I am sad and disappointed we didn't have a bunch of votes today. Why aren't we voting? Because they blocked it. Why are we defunding DHS? Because they don't want to talk and fix the problem. So here's the deal. No matter what, no matter how this ends, I am going to stay on this. I can't stay on it anymore. I want a simple vote as a United States Senator to have a debate as to whether or not sanctuary city policy, state policy, is bad for America or good for America. I think it's terrible for America, and those engaging in sanctuary city practices, you're hurting the other 38 states, you're creating chaos for your country, and you should be held accountable. One last thought. There was a clerk of court in Kentucky who was a very religious woman. She did not want to recognize a gay marriage in Kentucky. She issued marriage license. The Supreme Court ruled that gay marriage was the law of the land. She refused. I said she needs to do her job. She went to jail for 5 days, and she should have, because you can't let your personal opinion take over your government function. You can't just obey the laws you like. Same thing here. Every liberal clapped when I did that. Same thing here. If you got a governor or a mayor that will not turn over a criminal illegal immigrant as required by federal law, they should go to jail. I want to vote. I want to debate. I'm not going to let this go. The battle lines have been drawn. Thank you. I yield.
Mr. President.
Senator from California.
Mr. President, elections are the bedrock of our American democracy. And despite what the president and his big circle of election-denying conspiracy theorists would have Americans believe, the truth is that our elections are indeed free. Our elections are indeed fair, and our elections are indeed secure. That's why the revamped, new and made worse SAVE Act, passed by the House last night, and designed to compel states to give over to Donald Trump their voter rolls, is not just a solution in search of a problem, it's a very bad solution at that. This bill is built on a myth rooted in the big lie of election denial that has poisoned our democracy for years. That supposed non-citizen voter fraud occurs with any meaningful frequency. It's the same big lie that's still being perpetrated by Kurt Olson, the president's Stop the Steal lawyer, who is now working in the White House, and that was President and is now President Trump's decision to send the Director of National Intelligence to Fulton County, Georgia, late last month to seize paper ballots from the 2020 election. Ballots that have already been counted at least 3 times in 3 different ways, all reaching the same election outcome. The fact of the matter is that audit after audit and investigation after investigation in red states and in blue states have all reached the same conclusion. That voting by non-citizens, which by the way is already a felony, is so exceedingly rare that it is statistically almost non-existent. Which tells us something very important, though. It means our current laws are working. So we don't need new documentation requirements like passports and birth certificates. By the way, 21 million Americans cannot readily access these documents. We shouldn't be risking the disenfranchisement of 69 million American women who have changed their names from what's printed on their birth certificates, most of whom made that change when they got married. And we don't need to force approximately 60 million Americans who live in rural communities to drive up to hundreds of miles to prove their eligibility in person, because that's not election security. That's actually voter suppression. But it's important for the American people to understand what this Republican effort to jam the SAVE Act, as they call it, through isn't happening in isolation. There's a bigger picture here. This bill is part of a broader effort by Trump and his Republican enablers to lay the groundwork for the rigging of upcoming elections, including the midterms this November. Now, November may seem like a long way off, but the midterms have already begun. Primary ballots have been mailed out in many jurisdictions, and the first round of early voting begins today in some jurisdictions. And it's pretty clear which way the political winds are blowing. The American people are rightly frustrated by Donald Trump's failed economic policies that are raising costs for working families. And the American people are increasingly outraged by the cruel, violent mass deportation campaign unfolding in communities across the country, which has already cost 2 innocent American citizens their lives. It seems to me that the SAVE Act is really only intended to save Republicans and Trump from facing the consequences of their failed policies. But rather than change their policies, Republicans would rather change the election rules. How many times have we heard the president openly question our election system and why the federal government shouldn't run elections? At one point he said, and I'll quote, "If you think about it, the state is an agent for the federal government in elections. I don't know why the federal government doesn't do them anyway." End quote. Well, let me answer that question for the president. It's real simple. It's because the Constitution says otherwise. The Constitution clearly entrusts elections to the states and to Congress, not to the president. But those efforts to interfere are underway and ongoing. We've seen the Department of Justice sue 24 states that happen to be led by Democrats, targeting their voter rolls, in addition to the intimidation and strong-arm tactics. We also know that Donald Trump says he regrets not issuing an executive order in his first term directing the military to illegally seize voting machines. He's not shy about this, folks. He thinks he has a Department of Homeland Security now more willing to carry out such illegal actions this time around. And so, yes, the threat is real. Or consider his former White House advisor, who's called on the president to deploy ICE to intimidate U.S. citizens trying to vote this November. So let's be absolutely clear. That is already illegal. Armed federal agents at polling locations is voter intimidation and has no place in our democracy. Think about that. Think about that. Using federal force to intimidate voters at the polls? It's hard to imagine anything more un-American. And so that's why today, colleagues, I'm announcing a new amendment to the Department of Homeland Security funding bill that's still being negotiated and deliberated, an amendment to explicitly bar any federal funds from being used to deploy federal law enforcement or military personnel to polling places or election offices for the purpose of voter intimidation or election interference. It's amazing we even have to say that. It's amazing that we even have to think about addressing that. But that's what the president wants. Now, don't put him past him to try. So it's time to send the administration a clear message that in the United States of America, elections will be decided by the voters, not by force. And colleagues, we as a Congress have a responsibility to act to protect the elections entrusted by the Constitution to us and to the states before it's too late. We have a responsibility to reject this SAVE Act, to keep federal law enforcement away from polling locations, and to make clear once and for all that elections and our sacred right to the ballot box belongs to the people. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back.
Recognize the senator from Florida.
As the newest, most junior member from the great state, the free state of Florida, I rise today as well as the proud granddaughter of a World War II Army veteran. And I rise today to congratulate Mr. Dwayne Bruton of Cantonment, Florida, on the extraordinary occasion of his 109th birthday, celebrated on February 5th, 2026. Mr. Bruton is Florida's oldest living World War II veteran and among the oldest surviving veterans of the Second World War in the United States. He is a proud member of what history rightly calls the greatest generation. Ordinary Americans who answered the call, did extraordinary things, and helped save the world. They did not do it for recognition. They did not ask for praise. They simply did their duty. Honoring their service while they are still with us is both a privilege and a responsibility. When his country called, Dwayne Bruton answered. He served from 1944 to 1945 as a private in the United States Army during the Second World War. He was stationed in Vera, France, where he was wounded in the line of duty and later returned home. For his sacrifice, he was awarded the Purple Heart, a lasting testament to his courage, humility, and devotion to freedom. The world owes a debt to Mr. Bruton and to his generation that can never be repaid. Born and raised in Pensacola, Florida, Mr. Bruton returned home after the war. He raised a family and devoted his life to faith, service, and community. A devout Christian, he lived his values daily and by example. His daughters recall that throughout their childhood, their father rose every single morning at 4 a.m. to study the Bible and pray, an enduring memory that shaped their lives and reflected the quiet strength of his character. That faith extended far beyond his home. Mr. Bruton was a founder of the Brownsville Assembly of God in Pensacola, a church that continues to serve his community today. Through his life, he set a shining example before his children, his family, all who knew him, and to us, of what it means to honor God and country. May we all strive to live with the same humility, discipline, and integrity that he has shown for more than a century, 109 years to be exact. In recent years, Mr. Bruton has resided in an assisted living community where he is deeply loved by residents and staff alike. I am told that they are all watching today. On his 109th birthday, it was marked by a joyful celebration with family, friends, and community members gathering in great numbers. Surrounded by his 2 daughters and loved ones, the occasion was fittingly warm and celebratory, centered, as it should be, on a man whose life had meant so much to so many. Florida is the proud home to more than 1.4 million veterans. Florida is also home to the second largest number of living World War II veterans, a distinction we hold with deep gratitude and respect. We honor their service, we cherish their presence, and recognize our responsibility to preserve their stories and sacrifices. Mr. Bruton embodies the very best of Florida, and indeed the very best of America: faith, family, humility, duty, and service. His life stands as a living reminder of the generation that answered the call, endured unimaginable hardship, and secured liberty for generations that they would never meet. On behalf of the people of Florida and a grateful nation, I congratulate Mr. Dwayne Bruton on his 109th birthday, thank him for his extraordinary service, and wish him another joyous year surrounded in faith, family, and the enduring appreciation of a nation forever indebted to him. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
I recognize the senator from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. President. Are we in a quorum call?
We're not.
Thank you, Mr. President. We've had quite a feisty afternoon here on the floor, and I am so pleased that my colleagues have called out some of the actions that we have witnessed from the other side. It is beyond me that they would want illegal aliens to vote in U.S. elections. Beyond me. But maybe they don't want to preserve one person, one vote. Maybe that's not important to them. It is important to 80% of the American people. And, you know, they're not wanting to fund DHS. And they're saying, oh, it's over ICE. ICE is funded. Their money's going to continue. But what they are doing, they are defunding FEMA. They are defunding TSA. So if your flights don't go next week, blame the Democrats. And this week, we had a hearing in Judiciary Committee that looked at another inappropriate use of the federal government, inappropriate policies. And this week, I chaired the first in a series of hearings at Judiciary Committee that will address Arctic frost and the Arctic frost investigation that targeted President Trump, elected members of Congress, including me, and hundreds of conservative groups and individuals. Now, the subcommittee I chair is on privacy, technology, and the law. And we called before us the general counsel's legal representatives from Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile, the three wireless carriers that received unlawful subpoena requests from Jack Smith to access our phone records. Now, what we know, because of whistleblowers, these are people that work over at DOJ. They're a whistleblower. They saw what was happening, and they said, this is wrong. So we know what Mr. Smith was up to. What he and Merrick Garland and Joe Biden did was to weaponize the U.S. federal government to target President Donald Trump and his allies. Just days after President Trump announced his 2024 campaign, President Biden named Jack Smith as special counsel. And with the approval of the Biden Justice Department, he issued, get this, Mr. President, he issued 197 subpoenas to over 430 conservative organizations and individuals. Among them were more than a dozen sitting members of Congress, including me and my Judiciary Committee colleagues, Senators Graham, Lee, Cruz, and Hawley. Now, the question would be, what does this set of individuals have in common? What we know is this: we're all Republicans, we all support President Trump, and each of us had valid questions about the 2020 election. So here is Jack Smith, who was probably inappropriately appointed as special counsel. We never took a vote. He didn't have a statute that allowed him to be the special counsel, but he goes to great lengths to make certain that we could never find out about this deep invasion of our privacy and the violation of our constitutional rights. So he went to an Obama appointee, Judge James Boasberg, who signed non-disclosure orders, or you may call them a gag order. They did this to ensure that the subpoenas were going to be kept secret from us. Now, the basis for the gag orders was this, that notifying the members of Congress being spied on could possibly result in destruction of evidence, intimidation of potential witnesses, serious jeopardy to the investigation. I'm reading that from the gag order. Imagine that. We also know that Jack Smith's corrupt team of prosecutors consulted with the Biden DOJ Public Integrity Section about the subpoenas. They were informed. Get this, the Public Integrity Section actually informed Jack Smith and his group that there was litigation risk for doing this. Oh my goodness, that would be a violation of the speech and debate clause that covers members of Congress while they're doing their job. A constitutional defense. Now, the speech and debate clause gives us broad constitutional protection from executive branch interference. Mr. President, this is what you call keeping the executive branch from running over the people's elected representatives. But the Biden DOJ, they were out for Donald Trump. They wanted to block him from ever being president. They wanted to go get him 6 ways from Sunday. They were after him. So they decided, well, there's a risk, but if you put a gag order on it, they're never going to find out. So let's go ahead, let's roll the dice, and let's go for it. Let's abuse their right to privacy. Let's infringe on the speech and debate clause. Let's get in and tear up the Stored Communications Act, all because they wanted to go after Donald Trump. Well, thank God we have whistleblowers. And these whistleblowers over at DOJ came to Chairman Grassley. He started working on this, and you know what? We did find out. And we learned that Verizon and T-Mobile complied with the subpoena request, no questions asked, no concern for constitutional rights. They just rolled over without a fight. During yesterday's hearing, we got to ask them, why did you comply with these secret, unlawful subpoenas? Did getting a gag order on it not raise a red flag to you? Why did you do this? And the answer was not satisfactory. The representative for Verizon said they were aware of the speech and debate clause, good for them, but they had no system in place to flag subpoena requests for sitting members of Congress. But they say they've learned a lesson. As he put it, our processes, and I'm quoting him, our processes could have been better suited to meet what was a new and unique set of circumstances. Well, you know what, Mr. President? We're turning 250 years old. I don't think the Constitution is exactly new. I don't think the speech and debate clause is exactly new. I think that their response was truly an understatement. Verizon utterly failed in its responsibilities. So did T-Mobile. In fact, the company was under a specific contract that required it to notify the Senate Sergeant at Arms about subpoenas related to senators. I think Verizon forgot that. Yet, not a single person at Verizon or any of the carriers lost their jobs because of this. I went down the road, Mr. President. Has anyone been fired? The answer was no, and no, and no. Not a single person. There has to be accountability. If they can trample on the constitutional rights of sitting members of Congress and the President of the United States, they can do it to every U.S. citizen. We cannot let this stand. Arctic frost marked the worst weaponization of government in American history, worse than Watergate, and I am determined to make certain that Jack Smith is held accountable and that no American citizen, no one ever, is going to face the weaponization of the U.S. government against them. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Pennsylvania.
Mr. President, I rise today in support of the Save America Act. I've heard a lot of hysteria, hyperbole, and sadly, falsehoods about this bill, which have created a good deal of confusion. And frankly, a lot of the issues have become muddled. I think we've lost sight of what we're really debating in this chamber. So today I'd like to dispel a few myths about the Save America Act and address the legitimate questions raised or voiced by some of my colleagues. But first, I want to make sure we all understand how important this issue really is. Mr. President, I consider myself uniquely qualified when I say that every vote matters. In 2022, I lost my first statewide election in Pennsylvania by 950 votes. That's 14 votes per county. I won my second election in 2024 by 15,000 votes of over 7 million cast. These incredibly narrow races, each of which had electoral issues of their own, show just how important it is that our elections run smoothly, fairly, and only legitimate votes are counted. And right now, we must not pretend that all elections in America meet this important standard. Just last year, in my home state of Pennsylvania, Chester County officials mistakenly omitted 70,000 third-party votes from the voter rolls. Registered voters were turned away at the polls, and an unknown number of unverified voters were cast regular ballots. Every single time Americans hear about election problems like Chester County, they rightly question the integrity of our electoral process. It should come as no surprise to us that according to a recent Scripps and Ipsos poll, more than half of Americans, are concerned about non-citizens voting, and more than half fear electoral fraud. The bottom line is we cannot stand in this chamber and claim there is not a problem. There is a problem, and the people who put us here agree. Colleagues, we have a duty to root out the source of this distrust and restore the integrity of our democratic process. As we celebrate America's 250th anniversary, we must not put to chance what John Adams called, and I quote, the primary right by which all other rights are protected, end quote. And that is why I support Senator Lee's Save America Act. This bill will not fix every issue with our elections, but it does three critical things. First, it prevents non-citizens from voting by requiring people to show proof of citizenship when registering to vote, and to show a government-issued photo ID when casting a ballot. Second, it directs the states to remove non-citizens from their voter rolls by mandating regular reviews of those lists and giving states the abilities and the tools to accomplish this critical task. And finally, it improves accountability by strengthening the enforcement of the current law and imposing penalties on election officials who violate the law by registering non-citizens to vote. Now, the requirements for voter ID and proof of citizenship in particular have been twisted and misrepresented. Let me set the record straight. Federal law mandates that only U.S. citizens may vote. However, under the Supreme Court's interpretation, voters are not required to show proof of citizenship. The risk is clear. According to the Department of Homeland Security, over 10 million illegal immigrants entered our country during the last administration, and a total of at least 22 million non-citizens reside in the United States. In 19 states, non-citizens can obtain a driver's license in some cases, that driver's license automatically registers them to vote. This is an unacceptable vulnerability in our election integrity. And for that reason, it's now incumbent on Congress to close the loophole. We must secure the fundamental principle that voting is a right reserved only for American citizens. The Save America Act also requires voters to show a government ID when casting a ballot. Now, I've heard some claim this is too high a barrier. Let's be serious. We ask Americans to show an ID to buy a beer, to board a plane, to donate blood, to apply for benefits, to even get married. But when it comes to electing leaders who decide the direction of our country, write our laws, and command our armed forces, no ID is required. That is absolutely absurd. Now, many on the left look at our electoral system and they say there's nothing to see here. No issue, no problem. But that's what they said about wide open borders. That's what they said about censoring conservatives online. That's what they said about the botched Afghanistan withdrawal. And that's what they said about President Biden's cognitive decline. They were wrong on all of those things, and they are wrong on this too. And they are out of step with the country. Americans of all political persuasions have supported tighter election laws for decades. In 2005, former President Jimmy Carter, a Democrat, joined former Secretary of State Jim Baker, a Republican, to form a commission on election integrity. They identified voter ID laws as the single most important reform that was needed 20 years ago. A vast majority of the American people agree. As we see here on a poll from the Pew Research Center, 95% of Republicans and 71% of Democrats polled all support voter ID. My friends, if an 80-20 issue such as this cannot get 60 votes in this 100-person chamber, something is amiss. Now, some of my colleagues have raised concerns regarding voter suppression. They warn that many U.S. citizens do not have a hard copy proving their citizenship. The Save America Act directly addresses this concern. It puts in place alternate documentation options, state verification processes, and other protections that will ensure citizens are not disenfranchised. I also hear some of my colleagues voice fears of federal overreach. As a conservative, I believe that the less government interference in people's lives, the better. But the Save America Act does not federalize our elections. Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution makes clear that while states determine the time, place, and manner of federal elections, the Congress, and I quote, may at any time by law make or alter such regulations, end of quote. That is, we in the Congress, in this body, have the constitutional authority to set certain rules of the road nationwide. The Save America Act merely creates a mechanism to verify that state elections comply with existing law. Now, there's other electoral reforms that are also necessary and critical, including Senator Hagerty's proposed Equal Representation Act, which I'm proud to co-sponsor. It ensures that the census does not count non-citizens when determining congressional seats and electoral college votes. Frankly, I worry. I worry that some on the left oppose the Save America Act simply because they want to cheat by allowing non-citizens to vote. But at the same time, and as always, for my Democratic colleagues in this body, in the Senate, who oppose this bill, I trust that they are acting in good faith. But I do ask them and all who oppose the Save America Act, regardless of party, to consider the extraordinary stakes. We have the opportunity in this Congress to remove deep vulnerabilities in our elections and restore America's trust in this core function of our republic. I can think of few things more important than that. And for that reason, I implore my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to join me in supporting the Save America Act. And if not, I respectfully challenge you to explain to the clear majority of your constituents why you believe our elections are not in desperate need of repair. I yield the floor.
North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. President. I actually want to thank my colleague from Pennsylvania for bringing up what I think is a very important subject. I'm proud, as you are, coming from a state that had voter ID, and Senator McCormick, you wouldn't necessarily know this, but we passed the first voter ID when I was Speaker. And I heard all these arguments, and they fall on deaf ears. As a matter of fact, if you take a look at Help America Vote Act and other things, we can make it easy to vote, but we have to make it hard to cheat. And most people in America don't realize that we estimate about 20 to 25 million people illegally present in this country. And you should keep in mind, in each of the five last presidential elections, the margin of victory at the height was 9 million and at the low point was 2 million. So when we say that illegally present people who are able to vote can actually change the outcome of elections, it's not theoretical, it's proven by the math. So I appreciate your comments. Mr. President, I'm here to talk about a different subject. Sort of relates to the commentary that Senator Blackburn spoke about, but only a little bit different twist. You see, I think that vindictive prosecution is wrong, period. Whether the administration is a Democrat or a Republican, vindictive prosecution is wrong, period. And what we're on the brink of with respect to the chair of the Federal Reserve is calling the pot calling the kettle black. We can't come here and talk about appropriately the Arctic frost investigation. We can't talk about the various prosecutions under the Obama era and the Biden era as being bad if we actually condone what I believe in many cases are the same sorts of behavior today. I'm a Republican. I voted for President Trump. And I support the vast majority of what President Trump is doing. But I think we have a trend here that makes us no better than the people that some of my colleagues are coming down to the floor and criticizing. At some point, one of the two parties have to stand on principle and end this cycle, or it gets worse, and it gets worse, and it gets worse. And let me give you an example of where I think it's getting bad. A Sunday night, about a month or so ago, I saw a report that the chair of the Fed board, Jerome Powell, was being investigated by the DOJ. And we all know the president's frustration with Chair Powell. I've got some frustration with him, too. I'm an armchair quarterback. There are certain things I didn't like him doing, but I've never thought of him as a criminal. But I find out on a Sunday night that we have somebody in the bowels of the D.C. district of the U.S. attorney, an assistant U.S. attorney, who has decided to pursue an investigation and seek an indictment or prosecution against 2 minutes of testimony in the banking hearing that I attended. And I not only attended that banking hearing, but several of my colleagues did as too, Mr. President. As a matter of fact, I seek unanimous consent to insert into the register the comments from 7 of my colleagues on the banking committee who said they do not believe that President, or if I may seek unanimous consent.
Without objection.
What this document does, and the reason I thought it was important to put it in the federal record, is we've got, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, including me, who have said that we don't think a crime was committed. We're on the banking committee. We're the majority of the Republicans on the banking committee. I'm an old man, so I like watching forensic files. I don't know if young people watch it, but I've been watching it for like 20 or 30 years. And I can imagine this being the opening of a forensic file. Okay, normally it's about a perpetrator, something bad happened, the prosecutor's going after it because they have the eyewitnesses. Well, this forensic files opens like this. All of the witnesses at the scene of the crime said no crime was committed. Right down the line. In fact, they've even submitted printed evidence. Yet the prosecutor thinks otherwise. I don't think that'd be a very interesting forensic files because what it says is no crime got committed. Now, can we talk about whether or not there was an overrun in the building? There may have been. But I don't know if everybody's paying attention, but that happens a lot in government. And if we're going to actually accuse someone of criminal behavior because of a project overrun in federal government, we better start budgeting a lot more for prisons. Because that's the norm here. I hate it because I came from a world where you lost your job if you went over budget and over time, but that's just a part of the way this place works. But Mr. President, 2 minutes of testimony, 7 members in the banking committee present on that day saying that they do not believe there was criminal intent sends a very clear message to a young U.S. attorney with a dream in the D.C. district that why don't you come talk to the people who were at the alleged scene of the crime? We said we do not believe there was any criminal intent, Mr. President. 2 minutes. As a matter of fact, the other thing, if I could seek unanimous consent, I have another 2 pages, which are some of the allegations that were being quoted from a press report that are patently wrong.
That objection.
Thank you. This is a case where we had members on the committee responding to news reports that were proven wrong. And folks, I thought this was probably going to end this way. And it's one of the reasons why I decided to invite myself to a tour when the president went to this building to take a look at it. I was there with the president. He was very kind, shook my hand, and welcomed me to participate in this tour. I saw nothing there. I saw a few things, frustration. You know, you got Historic Commission, everybody else controlling the state of the project, but I certainly didn't see any criminal activity. I certainly didn't see any of these alleged rooftop garden tariffs, water features, VIP elevator, special marble. They had to take it down and put it back up. Building in D.C. is complicated. So almost all the allegations were disproven. And yet, we still have a prosecutor that's trying to pursue a criminal prosecution for the chair of the Federal Reserve. Well, the night that it was announced, I made the statement that I'll take this allegation seriously. But I'm concerned it comes from someone without consultation with big DOJ. I don't think Pam Bondi, any of the senior people in DOJ knew anything about it. Without consultation with the White House, they decided to pursue this criminal investigation. So they put me in an untenable position. If I'm quiet on that Sunday night and don't say something, Monday morning we may wake up to a very different market. If all of a sudden the Federal Reserve, that since its creation has been considered independent and separate from many presidents who have been angry with them, Democrats and Republicans alike, I felt like if I didn't put my foot down and say no one is going to fill that seat until this investigation is done, that we could have literally had headlines across all financial markets that the United States no longer has an independent Federal Reserve. And unless you track it as closely as I have in my current role as senator and in my past role as a partner of Price Waterhouse, tracking financial or banking institutions, you may not be able to appreciate that. But folks, this is real. The Federal Reserve is the gold standard for central banks. And its independence is critically important. It's critically important for us continuing to have the gold standard for the economy, the gold standard for the rule of law. We cannot allow some junior U.S. attorney, assistant U.S. attorney in some jurisdiction here all of a sudden play with fire. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't look through the second and third order effects, and quite honestly, they exposed the president in the process. So, Mr. President, I I find myself in a position where I want to reaffirm what I said very directly on that Sunday night before the markings opened on Monday morning. I will not allow any board member for the Federal Reserve to go through the banking committee for chair or for replacement of expired terms until this matter is settled. I have no problem with us having an investigation like we should with so many other areas of government. I'd like to have oversight for the East Wing construction to make sure that that stays on target and doesn't go over budget. I'd like to have oversight into the upfit of the Qatari 747 as a new Air Force One, kind of Air Force Light, because you can't take it out of the United States. All of those are taxpayer dollars being spent, and we should have visibility into that. So count me in for doing an investigation for the comments on that day. The 2 minutes of testimony, that is the only reason I'm at the floor today and refusing to allow a Fed board member to be confirmed, because I feel that strongly. As a matter of fact, it may take us to a new low in terms of a vindictive prosecution. And if you think Arctic Frost was bad, if you think some of the other investigations on the Obama and the Obama era was bad, ladies and gentlemen, we're setting a new low that could make that look like child's play. And for that reason, until the investigation is resolved, I cannot and I will not vote to support anyone on the Federal Reserve in my remaining tenure in the U.S. Senate. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, last month I came to the floor after the tragic killings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy and talked about what had happened in my state. Renee Good left behind 3 kids, including a 6-year-old. And when she was shot and killed by an ICE agent, her final words to the officer who shot her, "I'm not mad at you." Alex Preddy was a VA intensive care nurse, a guardian angel, who did one of the most selfless jobs one could think of, caring for our veterans, often in their final hours. Last Saturday, I met with the workers that were on the shift that only 2 weeks before it was that same shift of workers that were on when they found out that their coworker, Alex, had been killed. His last words were to a woman who had been pushed down by border control, and his last words were, "Are you okay?" His fellow workers at the VA recounted to me what a kind-hearted person he was, how every patient felt like they were their only patient. Other family members of patients have remarked about that too. The coworkers told me how he was the kind of guy that would fill in on the shifts when someone had a family emergency or just needed a time off, and he would fill in for them on their shift, including that Saturday morning shift. Both Renee and Alex should be alive today. And as we honor their memories, I'm on the floor again today, following the administration's announcement of its plan to finally end Operation Metro Surge and draw down the thousands of federal ICE agents that aren't just in Minneapolis or St. Paul, that actually I think people don't quite understand. They're all over our state. They're in the suburbs. They're in small towns. The number of calls that we get, my office is handling hundreds and hundreds of cases right now, but the cases of just someone who is in a store and gets stopped because they're someone of color, or the videos of 2 white friends with 1 Latino friend, and it's Latino they would go up to and say, "Are you legal?" And the Latino says, "Yes, I am." And they still throw him in the car, maybe because they could get a bounty. The number of people that were stopped multiple times, the Somali police officers who were off duty that were taken out of their car. The stories go on and on. You can't have 3,000 ICE agents in a metro area, and again, they also went rural in a big, big way, but in a metro area where they outnumber the number of sworn police officers in our 10 biggest police departments, which includes Minneapolis and St. Paul. They were triple the number of sworn police officers in Minneapolis and St. Paul. But for more than 2 months, Minnesotans stood together. They stared down ICE, and they never blinked. They marched, and I was there, 50,000 strong in 10 below zero weather, peacefully. And what I'll never forget is 50,000 people marching peacefully, filling up the entire streets of Minneapolis peacefully. And then less than 12 hours, 24 hours later, 6 border control guys shoot a guy with a cell phone in his hand in the back. They couldn't handle that. So ICE withdrawing from Minnesota, it's good. We're glad they're leaving our state, let me be clear. And when I talked to Director Homan about 10 days ago, he said this was the timetable, and they must follow through. He said they would first push out the border control agents and send them home, and they did that in the number of couple hundreds, and now they are bringing home the remaining Metro Surge ICE agents to get to the original footprint. But ICE withdrawing from Minnesota is just the beginning. We need accountability for the lives lost and the extraordinary abuse of power in the hands of these agents. And we, of course, must see a complete overhaul of the agency. And I do not know how anyone can justify $75 billion extra dollars for this agency, making them bigger than the FBI, when that money could still, the remaining money, go to local law enforcement. It could go to help people pay for their health care premiums. For months, ICE has made my state less safe. It's not just a horrific shooting. We have also seen repeated violations of the constitutional right of the people of Minnesota. I do say to our colleagues, if you believe in the First Amendment and the right to assemble, then show it. If you believe in the Second Amendment and that Alex Preddy had a right to be a lawful gun owner, and it was the border control agents that took his gun out of his holster, all he was holding was a cell phone, then show it. If you believe in the Fourth Amendment and the right against search and seizure, and that you can't have armed agents ramming through an elder Hmong man's door and pulling him out in his underwear and throwing him in a car, only to find out after they drove him around for an hour that they had the wrong guy, and that, in fact, the guy they were going after had been in prison for years, and that this Hmong man had done nothing wrong and was the son of a beloved nurse that treated American soldiers in Vietnam. Those are the stories that people are never going to forget in my state. A 4th grader from Columbia Heights and her mom detained by ICE on the way to school. The little 5-year-old, little Liam, standing there scared in his blue hat with floppy ears and his Spider-Man backpack. Those 2 kids, the 4th grader and Liam, sent to Texas. Then the judge, they sent them to Texas without even waiting to see what the court says. And then the court says, no, can't do that. And then they have to bring him back from Texas in his little blue hat with the little floppy ears. This administration also sent a 2-year-old to Texas. My staff and many other local lawmakers worked through the night on that case. Came back from Texas. It should never have come to this. A court case was pending, and they put a 2-year-old on the plane when her mom was waiting for her in Minnesota. These are just a few of the stories. As our local police have repeatedly made clear in the cities and in the suburbs and in the rural areas, ICE's actions have not made us safer. They have made us so much less safe. They have taken taxpayer money, at some estimates $18 million a week, and spent it on hotel rooms that should have been used for families visiting from Wisconsin and Iowa and Canada that like to go to the Mall of America in the middle of the winter. Those hotel rooms should have been used by people in greater Minnesota that want to come in and go ice fishing or enjoy skiing in our state. But instead, we had 3,000 ICE agents in Bloomington, Minnesota alone, our biggest suburb. 1,000 ICE agents in their hotel room. Think of how much money that is. And all the overtime for the police officers that could have been following up on child cases and could have been helping on burglary cases and could have been helping citizens with the trust that they built over the years. And that trust, so much on the line now, but kept intact because of how those local police officers throughout our state and local sheriff deputies have handled this travesty. This goes way beyond welcoming help for violent offenders, which we would, or a fraud investigation. Way beyond all of that. In fact, the opposite has happened because some highly experienced prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota, who have been there through Republican-appointed U.S. attorneys and Democratic-appointed U.S. attorneys, who lead and have led the cases on fraud, the important cases to go after the stealing of taxpayer money, and brought 80-some cases already and won major convictions in court. Those prosecutors, who are so well respected in our state, were asked to investigate Renee Good's wife after she was gunned down. And they said, no, we will not do that. And they stepped down. It reminded me of the decorated war veteran in New York, in their U.S. Attorney's Office, when asked to dismiss a case that had been rightfully brought against then Mayor Eric Adams. That prosecutor, who had clerked for conservative justices, a member of the Federalist Society, he said in a letter to the Justice Department, "You may find a fool or a coward to file your motion, but it will never be me." That's what those assistant U.S. attorneys, including the former acting head of the U.S. Attorney's Office that had been installed by the Trump administration on my recommendation, who did an incredible job through the horrific assassination of former Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband, and also was there at the sides of the families when those little children were gunned down through stained glass windows at Annunciation Church. Those are the people that they messed with and asked them to do something they felt were unethical. And as a result, all of the prosecutors that were heading up the righteous fraud investigations and prosecutions are no longer in that office. So you tell me how these actions have made our state more safe. It's the opposite. School attendance down. Families living in fear, people staying home, restaurants and businesses feeling the impact. Operation Metro Surge costing our Minnesota economy an estimated $80 million per week, all for the shock and awe. We're such a small percentage of the people that they apprehended were involved in violent crime. At its peak, one study showed that the surge cost federal, state, and local governments at least $18 million every single week. The fact is, Operation Metro Surge put our state at the center of America's heartbreak, but it also put us at the center of America's courage and America's hope. Every day across our state, people did extraordinary things. Ordinary people did extraordinary things. They drove other kids to school. They brought food to their neighbors. They showed up for small businesses. Teachers and other school leaders stood up and protected their students, organized food drives and computer drives. Attorneys across our state at private law firms took ICE to court to enforce people's constitutional rights. And judges appointed by presidents of both parties, including our conservative chief judge of the Federal District Court of Minnesota, issued opinions and strongly worded opinions demanding that people come into court unless their orders were followed. Today, the administration's top border official, Thom, announced the end of Operation Surge and the drawdown of the 3,000 ICE agents, again, triple the amount of sworn police officers in the combined cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, leaving only what he has called a small footprint. He has been straightforward with me since he arrived on the ground in Minnesota, straightforward with our chiefs, and we appreciate that. But we must be vigilant in making sure there is a real and thorough drawdown. We need transparent, objective investigations and justice for Renee Good and Alex Preddy and the many others who have had their rights violated by this administration. There must be new leadership at the Department of Homeland Security, and Kristi Noem must resign. That's what you do with $75 billion. You put bounties on legal citizens. You break out windows of people with disabilities who are born in this country and drag them to a detention center. That's what you do with $75 billion of taxpayer money. You take Hmong elders and throw them out of their house in their underwear and their Crocs on their feet in below zero weather and throw them into a car. You stop off-duty police officers just because they're not white. That's what you do with $75 billion. So that's why she must step down. And there must be major reforms to immigration enforcement, including a complete overhaul of this agency. Americans want federal agents to abide by the same code of conduct as local law enforcement and be held accountable when they don't. Americans want transparency. Federal agents shouldn't be masked, they should be required to use body cameras, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. We must end roving patrols. Federal agents should not enter private property without a judicial warrant. We must end the bounty system that incentivizes arrests without cause and has taken down numerous people, multiple people, hundreds of people in our state that were legal, born in our state, have passports. They wouldn't even listen to them when they told them as they threw them into a car. We must protect sensitive locations, and the racial profiling must end. Today, a number of our colleagues, including myself, voted against continuing to fund ICE. Budgets show our values. That extra $75 billion, as I explained, tripled agency funding, giving it more money than the FBI. That was wrong. That money could have gone to local enforcement, Affordable Care Act, tax credits for 3 years. $75 billion would have paid for everyone in the country to get their tax credit extended to help them pay for their premiums under the Affordable Care Act. An occupying force was in our state. They tried to sow chaos and fear, but Minnesota didn't take the bait. As Bruce Springsteen sings in his new song, The Streets of Minneapolis, against smoke and rubber bullets, in the dawn's early light, citizens stood for justice, their voices ringing through the night. We've shown the world how to protect democracy and take care of our neighbors. And we are going to continue to stand up for accountability, for justice, for change. And when people ask me, what can we do? Well, you do that. You continue to stand up. When people outside our state, what can we do to help Minnesota? Well, now, with ICE agents leading, maybe you want to wait till the weather warms up just a little, you can come and visit our great state. You can fill up those hotel rooms that were taken over by ICE agents and go visit incredible places in our state where Prince got his start. You can go to First Avenue. You can go to the Mall of America. You can go up north or down south in Minnesota and see the incredible bike trails and beautiful places, and Lake Superior, the most superior lake of them all. So that's what we want you to do. We want you to come to our state and visit. We want you to invest in our state. We want you to start businesses in our state. We want you to send your kids to school in our state. We want people to come and work in our state because we have shown the country and the world what we are all about. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Senator from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to set the stage for where we're at this moment. What just happened? Republicans voted to move forward on a bipartisan appropriations bill to fund the Department of Homeland Security, which includes, among other things, ICE funding, TSA funding, FEMA funding, and the Democrats voted no. Now, that's not all. Right about now, there's a bus leaving. There's a bus leaving the Capitol grounds and headed for an airport. Democrats are on that bus who just voted to defund the paycheck of the TSA agent making $40,000 a year to hop on a plane funded by your tax dollars to go to Munich, to go to Europe, and badmouth American foreign policy. They'll be sipping wine with the global elites, telling them, don't listen to President Trump. That's not who we are. I got news for you. The American people have weighed in, and they did in November of 2024, and this new direction of foreign policy is the ascending view. But outside of the foreign policy debate, just how offensive is it that they voted to defund DHS and are going to fly transatlantic on the taxpayer dime and trash talk America? That won't get reported probably many places. The corrupt media covers for the Democrats day in and day out around here. That's one of the things I've learned in my 3 years in the Senate. The hypocrisy is insane. That's where they're headed. In a broader sense, where are we at? And for my Republican colleagues, I hope you appreciate what this is, this moment, because this isn't some isolated incident. This is a 10-year struggle for common sense Americans who've pushed back against a radical open borders policy that's been pushed by the Democrats. President Trump won in 2016 on a few issues, but the electrical cord that began when he came down the escalator, that continues to this day, is taking on illegal immigration. And the forgotten men and women in this country, whose jobs were initially displaced when the failed policies of the politicians of this town sent their jobs overseas, the towns that I grew up in, and then when they were looking for new jobs, their wages were suppressed and their jobs went to illegal immigrants. The Democrats have never understood that. They've never understood that Americans were upset about that. And then, for the 4 years previous to this, Joe Biden let in 15 million people. How many? 1 million is a lot of people. 5 million is a lot of people. 15 million people came into this country illegally. We don't know who most of them are. We don't even know where they're at. What we do know is that literally tens of thousands of them are murderers. Hundreds of thousands of them are violent criminals. The left has tried to destroy this country through this open borders policy because we're all citizens of the world. Borders are just arbitrary lines on a map. That's where the modern Democrat Party is at. They don't actually believe that America as a sovereign country should be able to tell people who can come and who has to leave. So that's what this whole thing is about. This isn't about Minnesota or some recent event. This is about the Democrats failing to accept the verdict from the American people that they sent President Trump back into the Oval Office to fix mass migration, to take on mass migration with mass deportations. And regardless of the antics that happen here today on their no vote and flying with the globalists in Europe, it will not change that agenda. It's happening, whether you like it or not. Thank God we front-loaded in the Working Families Tax Cut money for deportations, tens of billions for detention centers. 200,000 Americans have applied to be ICE agents because they love this great country and they don't want it destroyed. This is another hissy fit along the way by the Democrats who refuse to accept the political reality that they lost on this issue. So as far as I'm concerned, we could spend the next year debating this on this floor. This is a home game for Republicans. But what you're doing to the American people, what you're doing to FEMA, what you're doing to the people who rely on their communities to be rebuilt, the TSA agents that go to work every day, the Coast Guard, is shameful. Joe Biden opened up our border. It is literally unprecedented in American history that a president would say, we're not going to enforce our immigration laws. Bill Clinton and Barack Obama deported millions of people. This is an effort by the Democrats, this debate, to kneecap immigration enforcement, to kneecap ICE. They lost the issue on the front end of the election. Now they want to make it so hard for ICE to do their jobs that deportations come to a halt. That's the truth. And anybody in this town who tells you otherwise is just spinning. They don't want people deported because they're importing a voter base that they think will give them power. They're not even hiding behind this anymore. They've lost the argument with American citizens. And they think if they flood this country with illegal immigrants, and by the way, you shouldn't have to prove you're an American citizen to vote. That's their position. You shouldn't have to show photo ID, which is broadly supported even among Democrat voters. Why would they do that? Why would they, even though their voters don't want that, even though their voters want photo ID to be established when you vote, why would they be opposed to that? Because they want people who shouldn't be able to vote, illegal immigrants or fraudsters, to vote for them. That's the truth. And so we have now the most secure border in the history of our country, and we're trying to execute on the immigration laws that we have on the books that have been voted for by Republicans and Democrats alike, and presidents of both parties have enforced those laws. This is about all the 21-point plan. If you think it's such a good idea, put that 21-point plan on the floor and let's vote on it. They won't do it because they'll lose. They know what it does. It ties up ICE's ability, which, by the way, they already have to abide by due process. There are already warrants. They know all this. They want to confuse the issue. Mostly because they believe in open borders, but also because this Trump derangement syndrome is it's a hard thing to kick, a really difficult thing for them to kick. We heard people being made, talked about here on the Senate floor. I want to mention a few names that no Democrat will ever utter. Laken Riley, Rachel Morin, Jocelyn Nungery, or Kayla Hamilton. These are American daughters, American sisters, who were murdered by illegal aliens. And by the way, Laken Riley's murderer wasn't a previously convicted violent criminal. So if that's your test of who should be deported, it didn't help Laken Riley's family. My priority, and the reason why I've been on this floor so many times about this issue, my priority is for Americans. Our immigration laws are put in place for one reason, to benefit America and Americans. The rhetoric that has come from the left on this and my Democrat colleagues, we talk about why was Minnesota a flashpoint? It's the sanctuary city status. The 9 sanctuary jurisdictions in this country, in them, ICE agents are 590 times more likely to be assaulted. Since January of last year, there's been a 1,347% increase in assaults against ICE officers, a 3,200% increase in vehicular attacks. And don't tell me Tim Walz doesn't have something to do with that. And don't tell me the Mayor Fry doesn't have something to do with that, with the rhetoric. Even senators on this floor have, called it Trump's secret police and the Gestapo and Nazis. Knock it off. I hope you know better, but some people are actually listening to you. You've created conditions where confrontations are more likely. There are deportations happening all over this country, in red states and blue states alike. You don't see what you see in sanctuary jurisdictions because they're cooperating. And let's be clear what sanctuary status really means to the American people, okay? Local authorities will not tell ICE agents when illegal alien rapists are being let out of prison. That's what it means, practically. They hate Donald Trump so much, and they believe in open borders so much, or they want new voters in this country for them so much, the crave for power so much, that they are willing to let an illegal immigrant rapist back out on the streets. A murderer, a burglar. Nope, we're not telling you. And oh, by the way, we're not going to send 911 to help you if you've got a problem. This is insane. So to my Republican colleagues, let's put all of those issues in front of the American people. I am not afraid of this debate at all. Bring it on. What's sad is that the Democrats continue to play the Olay game here. They negotiate a deal and then they hold it up. We saw this with the longest government shutdown in American history just a couple months ago, and now here we are again with DHS funding. Meanwhile, they're sipping wine and eating caviar in Europe. I went to Munich last year. It's also worth pointing out, by the way, that 2 years ago, almost to the date, we were here. And those of us who thought that quote-unquote bipartisan immigration plan was terrible, and it was, which is why it fell apart. It made illegal immigration easier. We had to hold the floor all weekend long in a bipartisan affair, by the way, to get the Ukraine funding done in time for Chuck Schumer to deliver $60 billion to Ukraine at the Munich Security Conference. What I have learned in 3 years here is the Munich Security Conference for Democrats is like the Super Bowl. This draw to commiserate with fellow Wilsonians is a powerful drug. I don't know why in the world Democrats get to vote no on this and fly to Munich. If the American people had any idea what went on in this town, they'd be way more upset than they are right now. They expect us to come up here and to work on their behalf for Americans, for the American people, for Laken Riley's family, for Kayla Hamilton, who was autistic, who was raped and murdered in her apartment for the $3 that she had on her, so an illegal immigrant could go to Target with his buddy and spend the $3. Why don't we hear about those stories? Because it's not convenient to the narrative. That's what we're fighting against and who we're fighting for. That's who I'm fighting for. And if it was up to me, I ought to talk about it, we would be on this floor every single day fighting for Kayla Hamilton, fighting for Laken Riley, and the countless other daughters of this country who've been raped and murdered by illegal immigrants. Todd Lyons earlier today testified, okay, just to tell you how sick this is, that in Colorado, the ICE wanted to perform an operation in Colorado to deport illegal alien Tren de Agua gang members from an apartment complex. So they tried to work with the local authorities in that sanctuary state. Guess what happened? Protesters were there, but the illegal immigrant gang members were all gone. They had been tipped off. I actually can't believe this is happening in my country. I can't believe somebody's instinct in this crazy, suicidal empathy. Their instinct would be to protect an illegal immigrant gang member who could very easily, and has, is some dangerous people, murder a family member, terrorize a community. They would rather tip them off than have them deported. These are the facts. So, what should we do? Here's what I think. I think it's actually an opportunity for us to strengthen our immigration laws. The Democrats want to kneecap ICE. I've submitted the Protect America Act for debate. It would do 4 things. 1, it would end sanctuary city status for good. 2, it would increase penalties for illegal entry and illegal reentry. A lot of these crimes are being committed by people who've been deported, they come back. That has happened. And by the way, if you come here illegally, I think you ought to have jail time. As a former federal prosecutor, as a former prosecutor, as Attorney General of Missouri, I can tell you, people respond to incentives. They knew, when we had a partnership with federal prosecutors in St. Louis, that if they were being busted for a federal crime, they were going to jail. If it was a state crime, and Kim Gardner, the Soros-funded prosecutor in St. Louis at the time, was handling the case, they literally would laugh in the back seat of the cop car because they knew they'd be out later that day. No more catch and release. If we're serious about it, no more catch and release. It's over. 3, if you assault an ICE officer, we're increasing those penalties too. Protest all you want. For God's sake, this is America. We have different points of view, but you don't get to interfere in the operations of federal law enforcement. Even if you really believe you're wearing the white hat, you don't get to do that. And 4th, this NGO network that's been created that is fomenting this vitriol and the operations that are putting ICE officers and citizens at risk, they need to lose their nonprofit status. So if we're serious about the problem, that's what we'll do. But I tell you what we're not going to do. We're not succumbing no matter how long it takes. If it's one day, and let's just say my Democrat friends come back from Munich and they feel really good about themselves because a bunch of European elites have told them all the things that they want to hear and vice versa. We're not coming back here, and we're not going to make it harder for ICE to do their jobs. We're not doing it. And I will do everything in my power, and I know a lot of other folks on my side of the aisle will do it too, to prevent that from ever happening. Because the American people saw what a disaster it was to have Democrats in charge of this country. We had a secure border. Joe Biden literally unsecured that border on day 1. And we had 15 million people come here illegally. We're not going back. The American people saw that. They voted for President Trump. He was very clear about it. This wasn't a footnote in his campaign. This was a central theme. And you may not like it, but that's what our republic is about. For all the talk of saving democracy and sticking up for democracy I hear from the other side, it's all nonsense. If they actually believed that, they would respect the fact that the American people voted for this. They voted for deportations. And I know that, like, in the woke left world, it's a dirty word. It's not where I come from, not in Missouri. People believe in common sense. They don't think you should get to break the law like that and get away with it. So, I don't know when, I guess we'll be back here in a week or something, but the reality is not going to change. No matter how much Chuck Schumer tries to villainize ICE agents, no matter how many times I hear my colleagues from the other side try to stir up people, it will not change this very basic reality. We have front-loaded money for deportations, and those deportations will continue, and there's nothing you can do about it. Now, if you want to make a proposal to stop that, put it on the floor. You'll lose. But I want them to know, and also my colleagues, I am 100% committed to this. It is central to the idea of being a sovereign country. No sane country in the history of the world would do this. By the way, speaking of heading over to Europe, ask them how mass migration is working out for them. They've done it, and it isn't working. So if you got any advice coming back from that side of the Atlantic, I'm not really interested on this topic or on censorship. Maybe you can deliver the message that they ought to step up for their own defense of their own continent in a more meaningful way. Now, that might not make you popular over there. That's the message that I delivered when over last year. But as it relates to illegal immigration, the deportations will continue. And I hope the American people understand that the people that just voted to defund ICE are sipping champagne in Europe, bad-mouthing the United States of America's foreign policy. That's who they are. That's the reality. And this debate will continue, Mr. President. But as far as I'm concerned, Republicans, we should be playing offense here. Let's strengthen our immigration laws. Let's treat this as seriously of a problem as it is for our country, as it really is. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.